I'll call this Jim Dunn and Jennifer McSorley. It all started back in Delavan, Wisconsin. My parents bought a small cottage in a place called Jackson Park. I enjoyed going there for the water and for the fun, as well as my dad had purchased a little small boat with a 25 horsepower motor. So when I became 16, my parents thought I was trustworthy enough to spend my summer break at the cottage. Mom and Dad and Dan, my brother, went back to Chicago during the week. I could stay there, but I had to find a job during the day, something to keep me busy. So, Lake Lawn Lodge was a beautiful summer resort on the end of the lake, and they were building a new facility there, and they needed grunts to help carry lumber and supplies and clean up and do all the dirty junk. So I got the job. I don't remember how much they paid, but that was okay. I got the job and I had it, and I met the qualifications that my parents said, you have to have a job. So I met another young guy there who was a resident of Delavan, unlike me. His name was John. He lived on the lake, but went to school in town at Delavan school system. Part of the benefit of working Lake Lawn Lodge was that we got to go to the weekly teen dances for free because we worked there. So one week, John and I went by my little boat from where I lived over to Lake Lawn Lodge because neither one of us had a car. So we were pretty cool going by boat. One night when we were there, a very, very pretty girl named Jennifer McSorley walked by. I turned to John and said, John, do you know who she is? John said, yes. I said, introduce me to her. I'd like to meet her. She's very pretty. So I was introduced to Jennifer, and I asked her to dance, which was the logical thing. We danced again a few more dances, and finally, towards the end of the night, I asked her if I could call her and maybe go out on a date with her. She said yes. Ooh, was I lucky. I called her, and she agreed to go out on a Saturday night when my parents were in town, because my mom and dad brought the car, of course, so I got to use the car sometimes on Saturday night. So my dad had a brand new Chevrolet convertible. I think it was a 1961 Chevrolet convertible, so I thought I was pretty hot stuff and going to pick up my new girlfriend in my new convertible. Woo, big time. But on that weekend, we decided to go on a date. So it just so happened that my parents invited my aunt and her daughter, my cousin, up at the same time. Well, I was expected to entertain my attractive, young, blonde cousin, who was basically, I think, a year or two older than I was. So I couldn't go on the date, so I had to call Jennifer and explain and ask to postpone the date. She said yes, very kindly. Great. So we began dating. I was crazy about this new girlfriend. I got to meet her parents, who, incidentally, were very much against having her date anybody from Chicago, the people that came up in the summertime. However, after a while, they changed their mind and they kind of got to liking me. We called and wrote letters to each other during the fall and the winter, and in the summer, I went back up to Delavan again, and we spent more time together. Back home, I would have to walk 2 blocks to a pay phone. There's a telephone that you had to put nickels, dimes, and quarters to make a long-distance call. I know, hard to understand. Anyhow, so I would walk with a stack of quarters in my pocket up to the payphone area about 2 blocks away from me and call and say, hi, how you doing? The next fall and winter, when I was back in Chicago, her parents agreed to let me come up and spend some weekends and spend some time at their house outside of town. So at the time, I felt I would go on to college and pursue my dream job, a radio announcer, with Jennifer. I had that in mind. I finished my first year at college, we decided to get married. Well, when I finally got a job, that's when we would get married. I got my first job at KCHA Radio, Charles City, Iowa. That's what I needed. We had a big church wedding at St. Andrew's Catholic Church in Delavan. It was a big Dunn family occasion. See, I was the first boy, the oldest boy, so my parents were not completely on board with me getting married, but they thought we were too young, but they wanted only the best for their sons. So we had a big wedding and reception with the family and friends. The next day, Jennifer and I got in the new 1964 Chevrolet Corvair. They don't make those anymore. They didn't make a lot of them back then. We put everything we owned in the backseat of this little small Corvair and drove to Charles City, Iowa. I worked at KCHA Radio there. We stayed there for about a year, and I got an opportunity to move to a larger radio station with a TV station. So, sounded like a great opportunity. They offered me $10 a week more, which was big time. So we moved to Austin, Minnesota, down in southern Minnesota, where I worked the evening shifts at KAUS Radio in Austin. I played rock and roll music, and sometimes I'd do the weather on KMMT TV. It was fun. I was living a dream. I was married to the most beautiful girl in the world. Everything was fine. Here I was playing the music I loved, the music I grew up with, rock and roll music. I received calls from listeners while I was on the air. I began to be recognized at stores and other places in town. So I got paid also then to do a weekly sock hop, which is another name for a dance at a local school. So I would bring my music and introduce the songs, and the young people would dance. I kind of became a local celebrity and got a little bit too big for my britches, very honestly. I felt I deserved a raise at the radio station and told the boss I would quit if I didn't get it. That's the old Jim Dunn. Well, he called my bluff. I didn't get the raise, so I had to quit. A real dumb mistake. Lesson learned. So Jennifer and I had no choice but to move back to Delavan because I didn't really have another job at the time. Well, her parents were very kind and very gracious and welcomed us into their home until I could find another job. During that time, I was looking for a job. I felt I had to have a job to support Jennifer and I. I just couldn't live at her parents' house for free. So I took a short-term job working at a local Chrysler plant making Chrysler automobiles on the assembly line. I did not like it. It was a terrible, miserable job. It lasted about a month because I said, I just can't do this. I quit and took a job working outside for a local tree trimmer in Delavan. Not too long after that, I finally landed another job on the radio. WRIG, AM, and FM, which was big back then, in Wausau, Wisconsin. We moved there, got a nice apartment that was walking distance from the radio station. Jennifer went back to work as a hairstylist. She was very good at that. We got a kitty cat, a little kitty cat, and life was good. We stayed there for a little over a year. I was doing okay, but not really well, salary-wise. My dad and mom came up and visit. Dad said to me, come back to Chicago. You'll make a lot more money there. And in his words, if you can't get a job there, you can't get a job. So at the time, I decided I'd give up my dream in radio and move back to Chicago. I got a sales job with a company called Glenbrook Laboratories. It was a good job, nice paycheck. I doubled my salary, so Dad was right. Once again, I got a company car. They supplied a car for me. And I wore a suit every day calling on drugstores and drugstore chains in Chicago. My dad, who had a dirty job, working in the alleys of Chicago for Commonwealth Edison, thought that I struck gold. Wearing a suit, driving a new car. Wow. So I spent a few years there learning outside sales. I had a couple of very good instructors, a couple of good bosses who took a liking to me and showed me some of the tricks of the trade, if you will. Jennifer took a job at a credit company in downtown Chicago, so we lived out in the city, and she traveled into the city each day for her job, and I took my car and went around and did my sales. She commuted downtown on the elevated train, the L as we called it. We saved our money together and decided to buy a townhouse in Bolingbrook. So we moved there, the American dream, owning our own home, owning property. Then, in April of 1968, right after what was called the Tet Offensive, we were involved, the country was involved in the Vietnam War, trying to save the people of Vietnam, I guess. So, in April of 68, I was drafted into the U.S. Army. I left, and Jennifer kept her job. My meager Army pay and her job allowed us to make the mortgage payments and continue living in the house. During my Army stints, I became a father. Jason Kyle Dunn was born in 1969. I was very lucky in that I was never deployed to Vietnam. I stayed here in the United States all my time. I stayed stateside for the 2 years. So after the Army, I returned to my job at Glenbrook. They gave me the job back. And I was promoted and transferred to Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, suburban Milwaukee. We now had a son and another on the way. During our time in Wisconsin, Jordan Sean Dunn was born. So we stayed there for about a year and a half, and then I was transferred back to Chicago with the Glenbrook Company. We now had 2 boys. We bought a brand new home in Streamwood, Illinois, and lived our lives, working and raising our sons. Life was very good. Unfortunately, because we married too young, my parents were right, our marriage began to fall apart. So in 1974, Jennifer and I got divorced. I moved from our home and became a separated father. Very honestly, it was a very difficult time for me. I was committed. My life was committed to being a father and a husband. And this kind of broke it all up. So now I was not living with my sons. I would be the best father and the best influence on them that I could be under the circumstances. In the summer, my perspective, in the summer of 1960, my parents let me stay at our summer home, as I said earlier. I had my little boat, go back and forth, and because we got into the dance free, as I just said, we went to Lake Lawn Lodge to the teen dance. So I asked John, my friend at the dance, to introduce me to Jennifer, who I thought was the prettiest girl in the world I'd ever seen. So, anyhow, to continue the story I said earlier, I'm redundant here. So it just so happened that we went out on a date. We continued the date. We dated through the winter and on through the next summer. We both graduated from high school and Judy and Jennifer, I should say, went to Milwaukee to beauty school, and I went to Columbia College to learn radio broadcasting. As I approached the end of my second year in college, we began to talk about getting married, so we sat down and raised a family. So I dropped out of school. Mistake, should not have done that. And went to get my first job at KCHA in Charles City, Iowa. We had a cute little apartment in town. I worked on the radio station, and Jennifer got her job as a hairdresser, as I said. And the rest, as we talked about, we moved on to Austin, Minnesota, and then Wausau, Wisconsin. But as I mentioned, in 1968, I was drafted into the U.S. Army. I was away from the house for 2 months at boot camp. I went to basic training at Fort, what the heck was that? It was Fort Polk, Louisiana. Didn't have it right down. Fort Polk, Louisiana, out of basic training, basic combat training. Then I went to Fort Lee, Virginia. Jennifer came to visit a couple of times, but it was hard. It was hard on our marriage at the time. When I was reassigned back to Fort Sheridan, here in Illinois, not too far from the house, I had to live at home. I was back at home. During the next 4 to 5 years, both of my sons were born. It was real life. We had home, bills, responsibilities, children, but Jennifer wanted to pursue a career as a paramedic, the first female paramedic in Illinois. I wanted her to stay home and raise our children. It caused some definite conflicts. She pursued the paramedic and took a job working a lot of hours away. Our marriage unfortunately started to erode at that time. We ended in a divorce in 1974. It was bad for me, I have to say. Divorce was not even in my vocabulary. Divorce meant failure, and I was not into failure of any kind. My parents were devastated. After all, I was Catholic. We were Catholic. Catholics did not divorce at the time. I was a wreck. Jennifer was determined she wanted to move on with her life. I truly believe the problem was many-fold, but at the core was the fact that we got married too young. My mom and dad were right. I was 20, Jennifer was 19 at the time. The divorce hurt me bad. I was very much in love with her, and I was crazy over my 2 sons that I would now get to visit occasionally. My world came crashing down, I have to admit it. It came down like a ton of bricks. My parents were very hurt. My father was very angry at Jennifer, and unfortunately later that same year my father died. In the space of 1 year, I lost my wife, my sons, and my father. I wasn't a good person to be around. I was very angry at the world. I was very angry at God. I determined I would never set foot inside His church again. How could He do this to me? It took a few years of being stupid, but I finally figured out He didn't do this to me. I did it to me. So at that time, then I finally decided to pray to God and ask Him for forgiveness and help. He gave me both.